In Chapter 1, we familiarized ourselves with the databases that we'll be using throughout this textbook. But how are those databases created and what makes them special? In this chapter, we're going to look at some basic database design fundamentals and some important concepts that we need to understand before we move on. Database design is the process of determining the particular tables and the columns that exist in that table that will make up your database. Some things that we need to understand: a relational database is a collection of tables. Those tables are formally called relations. So if we were using formalities, we would call a table a relation, but we're used to calling them tables, so we'll continue with that. We need to think of an entity like a noun. It's a person, place, thing, or event, and usually we take that entity and that's what we make one of our tables. And then we have attributes of that entity. So like for customer, we would have like customer name or address. We could also have a relationship, which is our association between those entities. And a one-to-many relationship is where one record in an entity is related to many records in another entity. So let's take, for example, our customer and rep table. You can see that we have a rep number for each customer, and that rep number is associated with one rep. So the rep is the one part, but a representative can represent many customers. So that's the many part of that relationship. So a relation or a table is a two-dimensional table in which the entries in the table are single valued. We don't have any repeating groups. We'll talk about that more later. Each column has a distinct name. All the values in that column match the name. So we don't put the customer's address under the customer name. And the order of the rows in the columns is immaterial. So it shouldn't matter what order our rows go in. It shouldn't matter what rows our columns go in. If our table is set up correctly. And each row needs to contain unique values. We want to avoid duplication. Rows can also be called records or tuples. Tuples. What did we decide it was? Tuples, whatever. You get it. And then columns are also called fields or attributes. So we could say that customer name is a field or an attribute. We could say that this row is a record or a tuple. We could say that our customer table is an entity or a relation. I know, lots of words here, but it'll make sense. Often in database design, we need a shorthand way to represent our tables. So if we wanted to share this with colleagues on a piece of paper, or we needed to have it documented in some place, we could use this shorthand representation of our tables. So the common shorthand is the name of the table. So this is the rep table. We have a set of parentheses. All of our column names or attributes are listed, separated by a comma. In this book, it uses all uppercase, so our table names and all of our attributes will be uppercase, and then if we have two words, we separate those with an underscore. So, we've used camel case in the past, but for our SQL, we'll use all uppercase. So each attribute is separated by a comma, and then here we have the customer table, and then all of the attributes of the customer table. Now, what happens if we have a duplicate column name? So we have a rep num in the rep table, and we have a rep num in the customer table. We know they're related, but how do we properly identify which rep number we're talking about? So in our code, we'll do this by qualifying the column name. So we'll take the table name, a period, and then the column name. So when we write rep.repnum, we are referring to the rep num in the rep table, If we wrote customer.repnom, we were referring to the repnom in the customer table.